I never expected a simple yard sale purchase to change my life. The old toolbox was rusted, dented, and smelled faintly of oil and something metallic. It was heavy, much heavier than it should have been for a box of simple tools. But for $5, it felt like a steal. The seller, a wiry old man with sun-leathered skin, hesitated before taking my money. "You sure you want this one?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "No refunds." I laughed, thinking it was just an old man's attachment to his belongings. I loaded the toolbox into my trunk and drove home, unaware that I had just made a terrible mistake. That night, I heard the first knock at my door, a slow, deliberate knock that sent a chill down my spine. I checked the peephole, but no one was there. I shrugged it off and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. An unease settled in my gut, an itch I couldn't scratch. The next evening, the knocking returned, louder this time. When I opened the door, a man stood there, tall and gaunt, with deep-set eyes and a nervous energy that made my skin crawl. "You bought something that belongs to me," he said, voice low and urgent. "The toolbox. It was sold by mistake." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver through me. I almost felt compelled to hand it over, but logic overrode my fear. "Sorry, but I bought it fair and square," I said, closing the door before he could argue. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, I spotted him across the street, staring at my house. That night, I heard my doorknob rattle, soft at first, then more aggressively. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They took my statement but didn't seem too concerned. "Could be a case of seller's remorse," one officer said. "Just keep your doors locked." Easier said than done, when every shadow outside felt like it was watching me. The next morning, I finally decided to inspect the toolbox more closely. Something about the weight of it still didn't sit right with me. As I ran my fingers along the inside, I felt a seam that shouldn't be there. My stomach twisted. With shaking hands, I pried at the false panel. It popped loose, revealing a small compartment stuffed with plastic bags. Inside, a fine white powder glittered under the dim kitchen light. My breath hitched. Drugs, a lot of them. The man hadn't been after the toolbox. He had been after what was hidden inside. And now, I was in deep trouble. My heart pounded as I slammed the toolbox shut. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? Dump the drugs somewhere? Pretend I never saw them? Before I could decide, I heard something outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Circling the house, I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. Peeking through the curtain, I felt my stomach drop. He was there, the man from the night before, standing motionless on the sidewalk, staring at my door. A wave of nausea hit me. He knew I had discovered the hidden stash. I crouched down, moving as silently as I could. My phone was on the counter, just a few feet away. But before I could grab it, a new sound made my blood run cold. The doorknob. He was trying to get in. Adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed the toolbox and sprinted toward the back of the house. If he broke in, I needed a way out. Then silence. No rattling, no footsteps, nothing. I waited, every nerve on edge. Finally, I gathered enough courage to check the window again. He was gone, but something was on my porch. A small, folded piece of paper. Hands trembling, I picked it up and read the words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "This doesn't belong to you. Return it before it's too late." A chill ran through me. This wasn't over, not even close. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. I kept the toolbox close, as if keeping an eye on it would somehow keep me safe. But deep down, I knew I had to get rid of it. The next morning, I made my decision. I would take it to the police. It didn't matter how I got involved. I just wanted out. I grabbed my car keys, shoved the toolbox into the trunk and drove off. But as I pulled out of my driveway, my stomach twisted. A black car was parked down the street, engine running, tinted windows. I couldn't see inside, but I felt it. Someone was watching me. I turned onto the main road, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. The black car followed, not too close, not too far, just enough to let me know they were there. I gripped the wheel tighter. My heart pounded. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I made a sudden turn down a side street, hoping to lose them. They turned too. I sped up. They sped up. Panic clawed at my chest. I wasn't going to make it to the police station. I had to shake them first. I took another sharp turn, then another. Finally, I saw an underground parking lot and swerved inside. I killed the engine and ducked low, breathing hard. A few seconds later, the black car cruised past the entrance. They didn't stop. I waited, heart hammering, until I was sure they were gone. Then I grabbed the toolbox and ran. Instead of the police station, I went to a motel on the edge of town. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. Inside the room, I set the toolbox on the bed. My hands hovered over the lid. A terrible thought crept into my mind. What if there was more inside? What if the drugs weren't the only secret? Slowly, I opened it again, and that's when I saw it. Underneath the hidden compartment, taped to the bottom, was a folded piece of paper. My fingers shook as I peeled it off and unfolded it. There was only one sentence written on it. "We know who you are." I dropped the note, my fingers numb with fear. They knew who I was. That meant this wasn't just about the toolbox, it was about me. I paced the motel room, my mind racing. What were my options? Go to the police? Run? But if they already knew who I was, where could I possibly hide? A loud knock on the door made me jump. My breath caught in my throat. I crept toward it, every instinct screaming at me to stay silent. Then, another knock, louder this time. I held my breath waiting. A few seconds passed, then a slip of paper was pushed under the door. My hands trembled as I picked it up. "Last chance. Meet us at the yard where you bought it, tonight, alone." My stomach twisted. This was insane. But if I didn't go, would they come for me instead? As the sun set, I drove back to the yard sale. Location: the place was dark, abandoned. No tables, no sellers, just an empty lot. A single car was parked near the entrance. Its headlights clicked on as I pulled in. I stepped out, toolbox in hand. My legs felt like lead. The car door opened, and a man emerged. Not the one who had come to my door, someone else. Someone with the same dead-eyed stare. "You shouldn't have looked inside," he said. I swallowed hard. "Take it. I don't want it." He walked forward slowly, stopping just a few feet from me. It's not that simple. Something shifted behind me. I turned. Too late. A hand clamped over my mouth. Darkness swallowed me. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of the road. The sun was rising. My head throbbed. My hands were empty. The toolbox was gone. Shaking, I checked my pockets. My wallet, phone, still there. But when I unlocked my phone, I found a new message from an unknown number. "Stay quiet. Forget everything, or next time you won't wake up." I never told anyone what happened. I never went back to that yard sale. And I never, ever buy secondhand again. Because some things come with a price you're not ready to pay. I've always loved digging through yard sales. There's something exciting about finding forgotten treasures. That's how I ended up with a box of old VHS tapes, bought for just a few bucks from a moving sale. Most of them were labeled old movies, recorded TV shows, but one stood out. A black tape with no label. Curiosity got the best of me. That night I dusted off my old VCR and popped the tape in. At first, it seemed ordinary. Home video footage of a family sitting in their living room, the parents on the couch, 2 kids, playing on the floor. But something felt off. The family wasn't smiling, they weren't talking. They just sat there, eyes flicking toward the camera every so often. Their expressions were tight, anxious, like they were waiting for something. I turned up the volume. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, too low to make out, coming from somewhere in the background. The family heard it too. Their heads snapped toward the hallway behind them. Father stood up, moving toward the sound. The mother grabbed the children, holding them close. The camera remained still, aimed at the doorway as the father disappeared into the hall. Seconds passed, then minutes. The whispering grew louder. The mother started shaking. One of the kids covered their ears. Then suddenly the father came running. Back, his face pale, his mouth open in a silent scream. The footage cut to static. I sat there, heart pounding, the screen crackling in front of me. What the hell had I just watched? I rewound the tape, played it again. Same eerie scene, same whispering, same fear, but this time something was different. As the father ran back into the room, just before the footage cut out, something moved in the hallway. A shadow, tall and thin, stretching unnaturally toward the camera. The tape clicked off. A sudden chill crawled up my spine. I turned to look at my own hallway, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was alone. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, my pulse hammering in my ears. The house felt colder, like something had shifted. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, expecting to see what exactly. I shook my head. It was just an old tape. Someone's weird home video, maybe a prank, maybe an art project. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I should have thrown the tape away. Instead, I did the opposite. I searched for the address where the yard sale had been. Maybe I could figure out where the tape had come from. The house was easy to find. It was empty now. A for sale sign stood in the unkempt yard, the windows dark and lifeless. Something about it felt wrong. I knocked on the neighbor's door, pretending I was interested in buying the house. The old woman who answered eyed me warily. "You don't want that place," she said. "Family left in the middle of the night. Took nothing with them." My stomach twisted. "Why?" She hesitated, lowering her voice, said something was inside the house, something watching them. A chill ran through me. I thanked her and left, but the unease clung to me like a shadow. That night, I made another mistake. I watched the tape. Again, as soon as it started playing, I knew something was different. The family looked more afraid this time. Their eyes darted toward the camera more often. The mother whispered something I hadn't heard before. "Please, make it stop." The whispering in the background was louder now. It was no longer a faint noise. I could almost make out words. But the worst part came at the end, when the father ran back into the room. The shadow in the hallway was closer. It wasn't just a flicker in the darkness this time. It had shape, and it was looking straight at the camera. The tape ended. The static buzzed in my ears. Then, behind me, a whisper. Low, faint, right behind my ear. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made my nerves spike. I kept glancing at the dark hallway, expecting something, someone to step out, but nothing did. Morning came, but the feeling didn't fade. I needed to get rid of the tape. I grabbed it, stuffed it into a plastic bag, and drove across town to the nearest dumpster. I tossed it in without hesitation. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter. It was over. Or so I thought. That night, as I settled into bed, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." My stomach dropped. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep. A few hours later, I woke to the sound of static. The TV was on. The screen flickered, filled with white noise. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't turned it on. Then, the image changed. It was the footage from the tape. The family, the living room, the hallway. Only this time, there was no father, no mother, no children. Just the hallway and the shadow. It stood there motionless, its form clearer than ever, long limbs, a twisted, unnatural shape. And then it moved, slowly, toward the screen, toward me. I scrambled for the remote, hitting the power button over and over. The TV wouldn't turn off. The shadow stepped closer, closer. My reflection in the screen twisted, distorting, my own face warping into something unrecognizable. And then the screen went black. Silence filled the room. My own ragged breaths were the only sound. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "You brought it home. Now it's yours." I packed my things and left that house. I don't know if it followed me. I don't want to know. But sometimes in the middle of the night when everything is silent, I hear the whispering and I know it's still watching. I love vintage decor, so when I found a beautiful antique mirror at a yard sale, I didn't hesitate. The frame was ornate, dark wood carved with intricate floral patterns. The glass had a slight warping to it, giving it an old-world charm. It was perfect. The man selling it, however, was strange. An older man with pale, almost grayish skin. He watched me closely as I admired the mirror. "You really want this one?" he asked, voice low and hesitant. "Yes," I said, already reaching for my wallet. He hesitated before nodding. "I should deliver it for you. It's heavy." Something about his insistence made me uneasy, but I agreed. He seemed almost relieved as I paid. That evening, he arrived at my house with the mirror. As he placed it against my living room wall, I noticed his eyes scanning the space, as if memorizing it. "It's an old piece," he muttered. "It's been in my family a long time. Why sell it then?" I asked. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Some things belong to new owners when it's time." His words sent a small shiver down my spine. He left without another word, but as I locked the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I dreamt of the mirror. In my dream, I stood in front of it, but my reflection was wrong. My eyes were too wide. My mouth moved, but I wasn't speaking. I woke up in a cold sweat. I chalked it up to my imagination, but over the next few days I started noticing things. The mirror seemed off, subtle things. I'd walk past and swear I saw movement after I had already moved away. Shadows flickered, but there was nothing there. And then, one night, I saw it, a figure standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance, but there was nothing behind me, just my quiet, dimly lit living room. My breath came in short gasps. I turned back to the mirror, heart pounding. The figure was gone. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a trick of the light, but I knew better. Something was wrong with that mirror. Over the next few nights, the feeling of unease grew stronger. I avoided looking into it too long, but sometimes I'd catch glimpses, small movements where there shouldn't be any. Then, one evening, as I passed by, I noticed something chilling. My reflection wasn't moving at the same time as me. I froze, watching, testing small movements. A tilt of my head, a blink. My reflection hesitated before copying me. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I turned away and grabbed my phone. I needed to get rid of this thing. As I scrolled through Marketplace, listings, a notification popped up. A message from an unknown number. "Why are you trying to sell it?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't listed it yet. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I turned off my phone and faced the mirror again. My reflection stood still, staring at me. That night I covered it with a blanket. I didn't want to see it anymore, but sometime, in the early hours of the morning, I woke to a soft, rustling sound. The blanket had been pulled to the floor, and the figure in the mirror was smiling. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that thing in the mirror watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. At sunrise, I decided I'd had enough. I was getting rid of it. I grabbed the mirror, hauled it into my car, and drove straight to the nearest dump. I didn't care how much I had paid. I just wanted it gone. But as I pulled up, my phone buzzed again. "Don't do this." My hands clenched around the steering wheel. The message was from the same unknown number. I didn't reply. I shoved the mirror out of the car, watched it crash against the concrete, the glass shattering into dozens of jagged pieces. For a brief moment, I felt relief. It was over, or so I thought. That night, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. Against my better judgment, I answered. A familiar voice whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." My blood turned to ice. It was the old man from the yard sale. I hung up immediately, heart hammering. A notification popped up. A new listing, vintage mirror for sale. And the picture? The mirror, unbroken. It was listed under my name. I packed my bags that night and left town. I don't know who or what was behind that mirror, but I know this: some things don't want to be owned. They want to own you. I've always loved old furniture, so when I spotted a beautiful antique rocking chair at a yard sale, I couldn't resist. The wood was dark and polished, the carvings intricate. It looked sturdy, well made, too good to be selling for so cheap. It belonged to my grandmother, the seller said, avoiding my gaze. I just don't want it anymore. There was something odd in her voice, but I shrugged it off. I paid, loaded the chair into my car, and drove home, excited to give it a place. In my living room, that night, as I settled in with a book, I glanced at the chair. It was beautiful, almost regal, but something about it felt wrong. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a chair, until I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of soft creaking. I lay frozen in bed, listening. The rhythmic sound, like someone gently rocking back and forth, came from the living room. My throat went dry. I lived alone. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed toward the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The chair sat still. I let out a shaky breath, laughing at myself. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe I had imagined it. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something. The chair wasn't in the same place I had left it. It had moved. Just a few inches, but it had moved. I stared at it for a long time before finally convincing myself I must have misremembered its position. I pushed it back against the wall and went back to bed. But the next night, the creaking returned, and this time I wasn't imagining it. I sat up in bed, every muscle in my body tense. The creaking was slow and deliberate, like someone gently shifting their weight back and forth. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The living room was dim, the air heavy. The rocking chair was moving, not violently, not aggressively, just rocking, as if an unseen force was casually enjoying a midnight sit. I flipped on the light. The moment the room was illuminated, the chair stopped. It didn't slow down gradually. It just stopped mid-motion, as if whatever had been moving it had been startled. A shiver crawled down my spine. I wasn't imagining this. Something was wrong with that chair. I grabbed it by the arms and shoved it back against the wall. My hands tingled with cold the moment I touched it, but I ignored the sensation and hurried back to bed. I barely slept. Every sound made me jolt awake, but the chair stayed silent. The next morning, I decided I had enough. I was getting rid of it. I listed it online, offering it for free. Within minutes, I got a response. A woman messaged me, begging me not to give it away. "That chair isn't safe," she wrote. "Please, where did you get it?" My stomach clenched. I asked why. She responded with a single sentence. "I think it belonged to my grandmother, and she died in it." My hands trembled as I stared at the message. She died in it. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Something had felt off about that chair from the start. I typed back quickly, "I bought it at a yard sale. Why isn't it safe?" The reply came almost instantly. "My grandmother, she refused to leave that chair. Even in her final days, she just sat there rocking. She said something was keeping her there, watching her. The night she died, my mother swore she saw the chair rocking on its own." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the chair, now sitting motionless in the corner of my living room. I had to get rid of it. Now, I grabbed the chair and dragged it outside, nearly tripping in my rush. My hands tingled with cold again, but I forced myself to ignore it. I left it at the curb with a free sign and hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. Hours passed. I kept checking the window, waiting for someone to take it, but as the sun set, the chair was still there. I turned away, trying to focus on something else. But then, creak. My heart stopped. The chair was moving, rocking on its own. I shut the blinds and backed away. My phone buzzed with another message from the woman. "Please, don't just leave it outside. You have to burn it." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too afraid to look outside again. The next morning, the chair was gone. I should have felt relieved. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. That slow, familiar creaking coming from inside the house.